Welcome, everybody, to Together We Serve. This is a powerful subject we're going to talk about today. You just saw that little clip of scars. Every 5 seconds, somebody's getting scammed. And love can be dangerous online. Those phrases got to get you sit up in your seat going, what the heck? As I always say, the internet, there's so many good with the internet, but sometimes we either turn away from it, don't think it's there, or don't understand. There's a dark web. There's a part of the internet that is so bad that people are being affected by this daily, well, every 5 seconds. And my guest today is going to tell her story, but also tell you what she's doing with the community. Together, she's serving with others to not have this happen. And if it does happen to you, where do you go? Male or female? I want you to think about, audience, today. If you got scammed online, where would you go? Somebody scammed you for hundreds of thousands of dollars. Your bank, your best friend, your lawyer, who? Well, a lot of times there's not enough resources there, and my incredible guest is going to talk more about this, and I'll bring her on today. We're so excited to have Debby Montgomery Johnson. Debby, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here, Steve. You're always a wonderful host.
And I'm a great guest too, so you can say both. I love it. Let's get serious. Oh, not that we were serious, but I want to talk about scars. That's why I wanted to bring it up. Talk about, this is your program you started, correct? Or is it not?
No, it's not mine. It was started by Dr. Tim McGinnis. I am the chairman of the board of directors right now, and an integral part in the victim coaching, the survivor coaching in our program, in our education program. So I do a lot. I am let's put it this way, the face and the voice of the survivors, which Dr. McGinnis wasn't. So I work a lot with the men and with the women. Tim works mostly with the men.
Yeah. What does SCAR stand for?
The Society of Citizens Against Relationship Scams.
Okay. 30 years ago, relationship scams would be like, what? There probably wasn't internet either. So the evolution of the internet, I'm sure it's going on. But one of those shocking stats is every 5 seconds somebody's affected. Well,
there are.
That's a lot. That's a lot.
And more men than women, which is really interesting because men typically don't talk about it. And actually, another great statistic is 3 out of 100 people report. So all the numbers and whatever that we hear from the FTC and from Secret Service and all that multiply by a lot. And we're not talking billions of dollars. We're talking trillions of dollars and hundreds of thousands of people. And it's a real problem.
What's your mission behind all this? I know we'll talk about some of the things you're doing, but what's your mission? My
mission, well, I love how you say together we serve. Because when this happened to me in 2010, I felt like I was alone and I shut down, which most victims of some sort of crime, in this particular case, financial fraud, you shut down because you don't have the resources. You don't know where to go. You don't want to tell anybody because you're so basically ashamed of what you've done and vulnerable to victim blame. And I think we talked about this earlier about the victim blame. You're not looked upon kindly when you're a victim of financial fraud. People are they just shame you and blame you for being so stupid, which is not the case. And so when I realized, actually after a couple of years of trying to do this on my own, I was introduced to Dr. McGinnis and SCARS, the Society of Citizens Against Relationship Scams. And this is after I had started the Woman Behind the Smile, which was my nonprofit. I'm like, why am I doing this? Why am I reinventing the wheel? Why don't I just work with Tim and with the women and men at SCARS and figure out how we can serve more people around the globe? And that's why I'm doing it, because I realized that I couldn't do it. I couldn't do it by myself. And we needed a lot of hands. We needed a lot of voices. And I really thank you, Steve, and folks like you that are helping us share the message, because victims aren't speaking. So victims' families and friends and those of us that have heard the stories need to get the word out there, because it's not going to stop if we don't talk about it.
What's the challenges of somebody that has financial fraud or any kind of fraud or scam?
The challenge is, first, where do you go? How do you know it happened? Because many times the scammers, the criminals, I'm not even going to call them scammers, it's organized crime. They just go away. In my particular case, actually, he came online and confessed, and I see it as a pleasure and a treasure right now of being able to see the face of the person, of one of the people that took advantage of me for so long. But typically they just disappear, and you're lost now. You've lost money, you've lost your heart, you've lost all sort of trust in yourself and in humanity. And now you have no idea who did it and how to get to them. I mean, I went to the FBI and they basically shut me down and said, well, you've been a victim and there's nothing we can do to help you because that particular person or group are not here in the United States. And they just shut me down. And now what do you do? Now who do you go to? The bankers told me it was my fault. You know, my family basically said that was your fault. I mean, nobody wants to help you because we all think that it's never going to happen to us. So that was really dumb of you to have had that happen. But in reality, it's going to happen to everybody at some point in their life. They just aren't going to want to talk about it. And I just got to the point when I did bring it up to a couple of friends at a women's meeting one time. Someone mentioned online dating and I rolled my eyes at her and she said, what's behind that? Tell me the story. And I told them, and she said, look, Deb, you have to tell your story because my mom was taken for $80,000 and never did anything. And then another woman piped in. She goes, well, I was in a Ponzi scheme, not once, but twice. And she was a financial planner of 42 years. And another one said, I was engaged to a man and we were going to get married. And I found that he had another family somewhere. So I was hearing about all these women that had been taken advantage somehow and nobody was speaking up. And that's when I realized that my issue, my story was not just about me anymore. And I needed to tell it because there are other women out there that needed someone to listen to them that understood. It's almost like they needed a hand to hold onto theirs so that they had the courage to speak up now. And that's why I do it, because it gives me great strength to work with someone else that's been through this. And it's unfortunate when I hear, Deb, I thank you so much for what you're doing, but I wish I had heard your story before. That breaks my heart because this is not slowing down. And we'll get into that, but with technology the way it is and the amount of money that is being taken from people, you know, the criminals are so far ahead of us with technology. And if there's a way to get money from somebody, they've already thought about it and they're doing it. And they're good at it.
Yeah, and that leads, so I want to start with your story. I want to lead with your passion because it's so passionate. And when I first met you, we talked about that. Tell your full story, be, you know, as open as you can be because it's an incredible story.
Sure. Well, it started in 2010. On April 8th, 2010, my husband of almost 26 years passed away suddenly. He had gone on a business trip on a Wednesday night, and Thursday morning I got a phone call. Actually, I was in a meeting, but I got a message from my oldest son, who was only 23 at the time. And he goes, Mom, Dad just died. I'm coming home to take care of everything. Well, my husband he hadn't been sick. I mean, he was diabetic. And so he had that under control, but he just left one night and I never saw him again after that. And so I needed to learn how to run his company. And this is what's really interesting when we're talking about Together We Serve. Lou was a solopreneur. He had a company that I was really not a part of. I had my own jobs. And so, but his company paid the bills. Mine took care of benefits. I was working as a treasurer for the school district. And so I'd had a lot of experience. I was a paralegal. I was an Air Force officer. I had worked for a bank for years and years. So I had a lot of good resources, and I knew the right people to call about learning how to keep Lou's business going, because again, that paid the bills. But 6 months into it, after he had passed, and I had really been running on anxiety and energy and everything, because I didn't have time to grieve. I had to figure out how to pay the bills. And so 6 months into it, one of my friends looked at me. She goes, "You know what? You need a life." And I had a life. I was very busy, and I took care of myself as best I could by swimming. But that was the only time I could cry without anybody knowing what was really going on. So when my friend said you need a life, they really meant you've got to get back and start dating again. Well, picture this. I was 52. I had been married for almost 26 years. I hadn't been on a date in all, except for dating Lou. I had those anxieties popping up again as if I was 16. The whole not smart enough, not pretty enough, not skinny enough, all those not enoughs. And I had to really sit myself down and say, okay, look, you've had some tremendous experience in life. Stop doubting yourself. Go out there, find a faith-based dating site online, and just do it cautiously. You don't have to jump in. I kind of dipped my toe into it, but I wanted it to be perfect, right? Nobody wants to have this crack. And I look back and I laugh now, because so many of us want to be the perfect. Lou used to tease me that I was Mary Poppins, and I wanted everything perfect. I wanted the pictures perfect. I wanted my write-ups perfect. I wanted everything perfect, because I wanted to come across as a together business person, woman, not a devastated widow. I hated that word. And so I put together by myself what I thought was a pretty good profile for the online platform. And I was totally surprised at how the men I was meeting, who were between 55 and 65, they presented themselves. There's nothing against this, but this just wasn't my kind of guy. They came in picture. Well, in their pictures, they were in wife beater T-shirts, the little T-shirts without any sleeves, or they were on motorcycles with a lot of tattoos and all that. Nothing against that, but it wasn't my kind of guy. And they couldn't write, as I put it, worth beans. My fifth grade grandson could write better than most of the men I was meeting. And I was like, this is not what I want. Until I got a profile from a businessman, an international businessman from London. And he was a widower, was the father of a son, and just a really good looking, athletic, smart, PhD businessman. I was like, this is interesting. And that started it. That started the online at the dating site. It was back and forth through messages on the dating site. And soon into it, he was a contractor for hardwood trees. This is the story. I had hardwood trees down in Costa Rica. And so when I got the name of his company and the website, I did my due diligence. I looked up who he was, or I looked up who the company was. I even called the company and said, do you have a contractor, an independent contractor named Dr. Eric Cole? And they said, no. And I'm thinking, okay. So I asked him about it, and there was always an answer to my questions. And I figured, well, he must be international. Maybe he just works with them, not for them. And he had gotten a job where he was going to be going over to Malaysia, working transfer of trees from Malaysia to India. And so that's what started. He was presumably in Houston when it started, and then within weeks he was going overseas. And he moved me from the dating site to Yahoo Chat, which for me was phenomenal, because I wasn't ready for somebody in person. It didn't feel safe enough yet for me, after losing Lou, to have a relationship in person. But I wanted someone that I could bounce ideas off of and talk to about, his wife dying. We kind of shared our lives and our children, and we were building something together online. And so he went overseas, and that's when things started to change a little bit, because as a business person, I understand that sometimes you don't get paid for a job until it's completed. And that's what he was telling me. He had this huge job over in Malaysia, and he said it's going to be done in 6 or 8 weeks. And that this was in November. It was going to be right before Christmas. And so we were planning on him being back coming back to the States by the holidays. And that in itself was an up and down emotional event, because I would make reservations for hotels, and I would do all these things to get him here. Well, and then his sister and son were coming in from London, and it was going to be this great family event. And then something happened, and he wouldn't be able to come. So it was an up and down emotional thing. But what's most interesting, coming from me, what I called a damn Yankee, where I didn't really give money away to many people. I paid my tithing and did all those, beneficial things, but I just didn't give money away, solicit, without knowing somebody. But over the weeks and months that we developed this relationship, he became my family. Again, I have 4 kids, but 3 out of the 4 were out of the house. They were in college or they were in military flight school. The only one I had at home was my 15-year-old. And I figured, well, his job right now is school and football, and he was out. My job was running the company, doing my day job, and then trying to figure out who I was personally. Because one of Lou's friends, after he died, said to me, "Deb, who are you?" And I started thinking about it, going, I don't know. For all these years, I've been so-and-so's mother and so-and-so's wife and so-and-so's daughter. Who am I? And that in itself was kind of a crisis of, well, I don't know if it was a crisis, but it was a moment to say, okay, so who am I? Who do I want to be? Who do I want to present myself as? And how do I do it? And so with the help of Eric, I have 4,000 pages of journal, which was a chronicle. I cut and paste our online communications into my journal. And then I have 5 printed volumes of that, which I thought would be family history. And in the end, it turned out to be, it could have been evidence, but they couldn't do anything about this. So stepping ahead, it was a 2-year relationship. It was only online because he was overseas. It did involve money. And it started very small. This is what people need to know, is that I lost a lot of money, and I didn't have it in the bank. I found it. I got creative. I had investments that I sold. I had retirement accounts that I retired. Presumably, I was going to get them back. I pulled money out of IRAs and stuff, and I said, look, we've got a short period of time where I've got to get this money back in, or I'm going to have some penalties. So there was a lot of pressure for that, but there was always the assurance that it would get paid back and you're going to be okay and not to worry. So I wasn't giving money away to somebody that I didn't know. He had become part of my family. And I figured, well, you know what? I will help him with this now. The job will be done. He'll come back. We'll have a great life. We'll be able to, raise families together. And my heart ruled my head throughout the whole thing. And it was exciting because all those hormones and everything, you're feeling like you're young again, and that somebody really wants to pay attention to you. And anybody who's been married for more than a few years realizes that not every day is, flowers and candy and all that. And some days you're roommates in a big house with kids around. And it, you've been married. You are married.
Yeah.
And,
No. Yeah, you're absolutely right. And then what's interesting is you fell in love.
I sure thought I did.
Yeah.
My heart
that's
was
the
in
feelings.
it. My heart was in it. Yeah. And I honestly, I would do anything for someone in my family. And at that point, I felt like he was going to be part of my family.
How much money did you lose?
I lost $1,080,762 over
Audience.
2 years. Over 2 years. I can hear the I didn't have it. I found it. I sold jewelry. I got creative. And I know people that have lost $2.5 million, and I know people who've lost $1. And it doesn't matter how much you've lost. It's the fact that it's been taken, under circumstances that are not your fault. And that's why we're speaking today, because it's not the victim's fault. The only thing that the victims and the survivors of this have done is they said hello. They said hello to someone. And then they had a big heart and wanted to help. And I think each one of us is at that point at some time in our lives.
And it's interesting because somebody stole my truck from my girlfriend's driveway, who's now my wife. And she called me 8 o'clock in the morning. She goes, oh, did you take the truck? I said, honey, I've been home all day. We were not living together. Well, the truck's not here. And we found out it was stolen. Now, that's not $1 million, but people out there, I know you're listening. It's the loss of something, your private, like you were saying. And now it becomes emotional. And talk about that, because it became emotional for you once you found out you were being scammed.
Well, and I didn't know the only reason I found out, I might have had, and I'm sure I did, looking back, hindsight's 2020. I had moments when I was thinking, ooh, this doesn't feel right. And I called them the pink flags. There was nothing red about my flags. They were pink. And I had caution, but I always asked. I questioned a lot of things, and he always had a plausible answer. And so I was like, well, I never considered anybody lying to me for 2 years. How could you keep the story straight for 2 years? And he wasn't like me, where I was writing it down, and I would do that. I got to know his sister and his son and his attorney through Yahoo Chat. There were nights when I would have multiple screens open, and I'd be asking Mary questions about Eric, and Eric questions about him, and then or about her, and then I was trying to build the story about who this family was. And how did his wife pass? And I asked a lot of questions, and then I'm sure he asked the same of me. And so in the process, though, I was also looking at it as a business point of view, from his point of view, because he asked me questions about business plans and starting companies and doing this and that. And of course, I had Lou's company. And so for me, giving him the money was more of a business thing, because I expected it to come back. I was never just giving money away. It was going to come back to me with interest and everything else. So when it fell apart, and the reason it fell apart is because one morning, 2 years in, and it was interesting, it was September 10th, 2012. I did an interview the other day with a group from Ireland, an Irish TV station, and I mentioned that date, and they said, you know what, Deb, that's tomorrow. I was up in Philadelphia, and it was right before 9/11, and this was right before the debates up in Philly. And so when it came crashing down on me, again, we were using Yahoo Chat. There was no Skyping. There was no FaceTime. This is back in 2012. He came online and we had this discussion about it. He asked me this question: how do you feel about forgiveness? I thought about that. We'd had a lot of spiritual discussions over the years. And so I put on my scriptural hat and got everything out. And I started talking for hours about how I felt about forgiveness. And you really have to put your money where your mouth is when you're being honest about forgiveness. And then we got disconnected. And a couple hours later, he came back and came back online. And he said, let's revisit what we were talking about. How do you feel about forgiveness? And into it, I'm thinking, what did I do that we're talking about forgiveness? What did I do, right? What did I do? And I asked him, I said, what have I done? And he said, it's not you. He goes, I have something I've got to tell you, and it's going to hurt you. And I'm thinking, yep, you don't need to hurt me. And he says, Deb, I have a confession to make. And when I heard that was a gut punch for me, because I'd heard that once in my marriage, and we got through it, but it wasn't a very happy time for me. And so I was like, I'm not ready for this. And he says, I have to confess, this has all been a scam. And I'm reading those words, and I've got dual screens on my computer, and I've got my handsome Brit up there, and I'm thinking, you're lying. Something's wrong. I question, are you sick? Are you hurt? What is going on here? And he goes, no, this has all been a scam. And at that point, I'm thinking, how do I get my money back? What do we do now? And I said, you have to prove to me this is a scam. And so he goes, on Yahoo Chat, there's this little camera, and I'm going to walk you through how to bring it up. And I'm thinking, oh, shoot. For 2 years, I've been trying to get him to come online because I wanted to see my handsome Brit. And up pops this little camera, and I'm looking at this dark-haired, dark-eyed, dark-skinned young man with a big smile on his face. And for me, it was like hitting a brick wall. And I've got a picture of him. I have no idea how I did that, but I had my phone, and I kept my camera down, my phone low, so he wouldn't see it, but I took a picture of him. And that picture is actually in my book, which is called The Woman Behind the Smile. But it's the only picture that I have of the real person. And I'm looking at it, and that's, it was interesting too, that my head and my heart got back together, and the head's going, okay, so how do you catch him? You were an intelligence officer, you're a banker, you were all these things. How do we catch him? You've seen TV shows, keep him engaged, get all this information and take it to the FBI. But I'm also asking him, why did you do it? And then again, why did you confess? And he actually said to me that he confessed he had to, I got to go back to feeling like part of him had to have felt a little bit of my goodness and love, and that he'd have to have a little bit of a heart there. Now, Dr. McGinnis would say, Deb, this is part of the scam. But not many of the scammers and the criminals will show themselves like that, especially 10 years ago. But for me, that was one of the best things that could have happened, because by seeing him like that, I could put a face to the crime. I can use that face for other women who their scammers just walk away and you think they're dead. I'm like, look at this person. This is who is taking advantage of us. But I also go back to when Lou passed. I got that phone call from my son. Saying, Mom, Dad died. I never saw Lou again. My parents took care of all the things. And so being military for all those years, when Lou didn't come home, it was almost like he'd gone on a TDY, which is a temporary duty, like a business trip, and forgot to call home. And if that had happened in this particular case, if Eric or whoever, Joseph, I guess the man's name was, if he had just disappeared, I would have felt like like I was reliving Lou dying. But this time without $1 million. And that was really sad. But that brick moment really shook me to the core. And I was like, now I had to get him. And when I went to the FBI the next day, because I called my mother and dad, the one part of this whole story which just broke my heart the most was I got my mom and dad involved, and they lent me $100,000. And I knew I wasn't going to get that money back. I felt morally, physically sick because I love my parents. And we were just talking, my dad just turned 95. So this was back, when he was 83. He'd been retired. Wow. He had been retired for all those years. I had to make things right for my parents. And I have now. But back then, I didn't know how in the world I was ever going to keep going. And that's what happens to most people. They've lost their retirement. They've lost all their finances. Many have lost their homes because the scammers are getting them to refinance their homes or to sell their homes or to do whatever. So imagine a 65, 70, 75-year-old woman. I speak from the women's point of view, but this men too. They don't have those anymore. What do? Their families aren't going to take them in. They don't have any friends. They're severely depressed. The bankers aren't helping them. Law enforcement's not helping them. And they are just going into deep depression. It's really post-traumatic stress. And many are committing suicide. That's the damage that this is doing.
It's terrible.
Sad. It's sad.
And I've heard this story before. It still stands my hair on my arms. And you keep reiterating, which I'm glad you are. It's men too, just men. Hey, us men, we're not there's beautiful women out there pretending to be beautiful women. But before we go to break, a question came to my head and a thought. Do you think he showed himself and said, hey, I'm this guy, Joe, just to laugh in your face? I think you're right. I think part of it was his heart. You were such a nice person that he felt a little bad, but he never, of course, gave you the money back. But I'm picturing this guy popping up and go, ha, gotcha, Debbie. This is all a scam.
I never got that impression. There are people there are women that I've talked to recently where their scammers come on and they do that, but they're very angry and they're taunting them and they're bragging. I've seen FBI videos of these guys receiving money and just their selfies basically, and they're counting all this cash and they're basically throwing in our faces saying, we deserve to be able to take this money from you. And that's sad. That's sad. There's no reason ever for someone to steal like that. And even if they could, and I've heard the stories, well, they do it because there's no economic possibilities for them in their countries. Well, that's horsewash, and they're actually getting arrested over there, not because of the online fraud, but because they're tax evasion. They're not paying taxes on their goods. So you're in a bad, not living in a nice community. Now you're running around with a new car, all this cash and jewels and everything else. It's hello, it's in your face. Well, you're going to get your due at some point. But I don't think he can. I never got that feeling that he confessed to throw it in my face. I felt for a moment that perhaps he was human. And
silver lining, not a good one, but it's a silver lining that, possible people have a heart there. That's just so interesting that people would put in your face. Well, we're going to take a break. She's been talking a lot. This is such an incredible subject. So let's take a break. I've got a little video to show you. She's been interviewed by Mel Robbins, I believe, one of the top. She's almost like Oprah when it comes to interviewers. So I want to play that, and let's let Debbie get some water. We'll be right back in about 5-10 minutes.
Like Debbie, who unknowingly was catfished for 2 years after she became a widow.
My husband Lou died, and after 26 years, I became an overnight widow. I was sad and lonely, and at 52, I had to start over, and I was struggling. My friends pushed me into getting out and getting into online dating. So I went on a faith-based dating site and created a profile. It turned out to be the biggest mistake of my life. I fell head over heels in love with a man who wasn't who he said he was. I was catfished, scammed. I was emotionally and financially devastated. I gave this man who I believed was in love with me 2 years of my life and more money than I care to admit, but it was all a lie.
So you met this scammer named Eric online. What was it about his profile that immediately drew you in?
Well, my husband had just passed away suddenly. I was married 26 years, and I was running his business, and I was running my own company, and I was lonely. I was sad. I'd go swimming at night, and I would cry because I was by myself. And my girlfriend said, you need a life. You have to get online. And that's what I did. I went up and I put the most perfect profile up that I could. And I was looking for love from a distance.
And what did he say to you to lure you in?
We talked about family. I'm a big family person, and we talked about our children. We talked about my husband dying. We talked about his wife dying. We talked about business. I'm an entrepreneur. I was working from home, and it was really nice to have somebody I could discuss my company with and how better to run the business, because he was an international businessman.
Where was he from?
He was from Houston originally, and he had gotten a contract in Malaysia. He was a contractor for hardwood trees, and I happened to have investments in trees, which he didn't know about. And so he was working overseas.
Gotcha. And we have a picture. What was the name that he gave you?
His name, as he said, call me Eric Cole. He was a widower, had a 10-year-old son named Kenny and a widowed sister named Mary. He was traveling around the world, and he was this handsome Brit, and I was intrigued by an international businessman.
And what did you two talk about?
We talked about everything. We talked about, I have 4,000 pages of journal that was discussions over the 2 years. And we talked about everything from family to being sad about things that had happened. I was married for almost 26 years, so we had a lot to talk about.
Yeah. And this was all online?
It was all online.
And did you ever get on the phone?
I talked with him 3 times in the 2 years, but again, he was overseas. And there was always issues with locations of where he was and being able to connect.
So was it hard to hear him?
It was, but when I did talk to him, I heard his British accent, which just fed right into it. And it was very fun to talk to him. We laughed, we cried, we did all sorts of things.
So what was it like when you would hear the ding and know that there was a message from Eric?
I would even if I was sound asleep in bed, I would run to my computer, which was across the house, and the endorphins would just be going, I'm in love. It was like I was 16 again, and all those feelings of excitement and joy. And we would get online, and when I say chat, we would be typing. We would chat for hours.
Wasn't it a red flag that you never met in person?
I don't call it a red flag. For me, it's a pink flag.
What does that mean?
That means
it's a flag.
It's a flag. And part of me, I was very well trained in my careers.
Yeah, because what did you do? This is the part where I was like, wait, what did you do for a career?
I was an Air Force intelligence officer.
Guys,
I can never hear that story enough. You could tell Debbie's a wonderful woman. All she does care. She talked about family in her conversation in the first segment probably 4, 5, 6 times. I've got it counted here. And she was an intelligence officer. Think about that. In the military, she was trained by the top people, and she got scammed for over $1 million. I think all of us are susceptible to this. And this is the power. I want to bring her back because here's the exciting part. She's got resources and ways to avoid it or to help you get through it if it does hit you, because that's, as she said earlier in the first segment, is a problem. So I want to bring Debbie back. Debbie, welcome back. Let me bring us both on here. There we go. I love that interview because of Mel Robbins' face when she said, "Wait a minute," and you're so so kind, like, "Yeah, I was an intelligence officer." So we know the story. Let's talk about the good stuff you're doing, and God bless you. Your servant's heart. You're serving together. What are you doing now to help victims, but also before to help men and women not have this ever happen to them?
Well, to go back to her show. Get rid of the word catfished. We have to change our language about this. It wasn't a scam. It was a financial crime. It wasn't catfishing. That sounds like the guys in Louisiana that are sticking their hands in a hole. It was manipulation. It was we call it the amygdala hijack. There's a psychology to a scam. It's very, very creative, and they're well trained in universities over in Ghana and in Nigeria, and so all those call centers that America set up years and years ago are now being used in similar ways for big groups to organize this crime. So it's just, what are we doing? We're not doing enough because it's not being talked about. Social media and the dating sites can hide behind the CDA, the Communications Decency Act. They're not liable for what is out there. So there's nobody's fault but the victims. There's no way. It was interesting on the Mel Robbins show there. One of the other guests was a retired Army colonel whose picture had been used by thousands of scam profiles. And Department of Defense couldn't shut it down. Facebook wouldn't shut it down. His life has been changed. He retired from the military, and now he's working with an anti-scam group to bring recognition of his profile was used. His identity was stolen. He's a victim of this also. And it doesn't affect just the man or woman that had the money stolen. It affects their families. It affects the person who belongs to the pictures. That stolen identity. I mean, in Brian's case, I call it stolen valor, because our military I'm former Air Force. I've got kids that are active duty. It gripes me to no end when the scam criminals are using military photos as a lure, because people typically have trust in the military, trust in anybody in a uniform, a doctor, a police officer. There's trust in those positions. And now when someone gets scammed by someone that had been posing as a military person, that now throws distrust of people that we should trust the most. So there's so much to it, and we got to get past the victim blaming. We've got to get past the shame, because we have all done something in our lives that we don't like, that we regret. But in this particular case, I'm going to go deviate a little bit. 50 years ago, when a woman walked into a police department with a black eye, she would be told, honey, go home and be nicer to your spouse. You walk into a police department today with a black eye, man or woman, and whoever hits you or whatever is going to be arrested immediately. Domestic violence. In this particular case of financial abuse, and many times it's elder abuse, the victim will walk into a police department and you can feel the people on the other side of the desk laughing at you. They may not do it in your face, but they're not taking this seriously, unless it's happened to somebody that they know. This is the same with politicians, the same with social media companies. Until they are affected personally, either a father, mother, daughter, son, husband, they're not going to take it as seriously as they should, because this is affecting millions of people around the world. And it's devastating to the individual. It's devastating to the community. I had a friend who called me up and she said, Deb, what do I do? One of my older neighbors came over and she said she wanted me to help her take a picture of her driver's license, her credit card, because she needed to get it to a friend of hers. And I'm like, oh no, stop her immediately. Well, the woman didn't have to take a picture of it. All she had to do is give them the number. Same thing, right? So then when this happened, my friend got with her, and the woman still didn't believe that she's being taken. My friend called the bank that had the credit card, and they're like, sorry, there's nothing we can do because you're not on the account. I understand their point of view, because I could say, hey, let's call up Bank of America and put Steve's card on hold. Well, I can't do that. But what my friend did very well is that she was listening to her neighbor. She was listening to what was being said, because most people will stop talking when they start sending money. I know I did. When my kids said, Mom, don't, I'm thinking, hey, leave me alone. I'm the adult here. I can do what I want. Now, I had to eat those words later on and had to explain to my kids how sorry I was. But you can't treat someone that's a possible victim or someone that's possibly in one of these situations as a 2-year-old. I've told this to bankers. I've told it to law enforcement. You have to listen to what they're saying. You have to validate what they're saying, but then you have to get them to take a pause and put a little doubt in the story, because the scammers are always like, do it fast, go in there and get this wire transfer done fast, or go to this Bitcoin machine fast. I have a friend, my financial planner friend, who's she called me up. Her sister had been taken for about $10,000. Her sister was on the phone with these people, these criminals, and they were walking her, on the phone. You imagine her walking around town with a phone up to her ear, and she was going to Bitcoin ATM machines. I wouldn't have a clue as to how to do that. She didn't either. They were talking her through how to do it. And the way it stopped is that she got to one little kiosk and she couldn't figure it out. And the owner of the store came to her and said, I think you're being scammed here. You need to stop.
Oh my God.
The only reason she stopped. And then she's like, so now what do I do? Now I've lost $10,000. And her girlfriend, her sister, calls me. And I'm like, I'm really sorry, because for the most part, you can't get the money back. Bitcoin, there's a chance that you can if it's done quickly. Wire transfers, there's a chance if you do it quickly. But for me, it was years later, there's no way to get it back. So
yeah. And they know that. That's the criminals know that. That's why they go that way. A question, as I'm watching Mel Rowan's interview with you, and they show the picture of who you thought it was. Did you ever meet that guy? Do you know who he is, identity? Never.
No.
I'm just curious.
And I didn't pursue it. I do have women that I've worked with. It's very interesting, though, because you spend all this time looking at those pictures. You believe that that's the scammer, that that's the criminal, when in fact, that guy's pictures have been stolen. So if you now go and try to find him, or go and try to stalk him, or call up his wife, you're the stalker now, and you're going to be criminally liable for whatever you're doing against this folks. Tim and I have interviewed many men who have whose pictures have been taken, women too, but I've done it with military guys that have been, their photos have been used for profiles. Their wives and children are being harassed. Women would call up and say, "Don't you realize that your husband's having an affair with me and I'm sending him all this money and blah, blah, blah." Don't call those guys. Those guys are victims. I had a couple of women out in California who swore that the man that was taking advantage of them was a very well-known investor in South Africa. And one of these women was an attorney out in California. And she goes, "You all don't know what you're talking about. I know exactly who this man was," and blah, blah. There are a lot of victims that become very angry. We can't work with them at SCARS. If you're a hater, a denier, you're going out for revenge, you're never going to recover, and we can't help you. And that's the thing about going into recovery from this. It's a difficult thing because a third of the victims are going to be haters and deniers, and any of them that see what we're trying to do are going to get really angry at us. A third are going to be the avengers, and do everything they can to try to bring down photos and to try to, out the scams. You try to put a Facebook photo down or whatever, I've reported multiples, and they come back saying these do not go against our community principles or whatever. It's rubbish. So many of they could take them down if they wanted to. There is technology to get those things down, but they don't want to, at least not yet. But then the victims that that have recognized what has happened, that we call them the realists, they understand now they've been taken. They understand they're probably not going to get their money back, but they understand that they need to recover in order to have any sort of life going forward. And it's hard for an elder person to do that because they may be on Social Security. They have limited resources to start working again. Many of them are physically impaired and they can't work. They can't drive. Some of them like to do Uber, whatever the girls can do. I'm like, you got to start to do something, but you can't give up your life. You need to do some service. We're talking about Together We Serve. The best way to recover from something like this is to serve other people, because then your problems don't look half as bad. You may still have money issues, but by going to the police and filing a police report, you don't get any money back. They can't do anything for you, but you can get a police report. And in some states that might give you some sort of free therapy or maybe some free rent assistance. There are things that you can get from filing a report as a victim of a crime. And that's what you are. You're not a scam victim. You haven't been scammed at an online dating or a catfishing thing. You've been a victim of financial fraud. And police departments understand that, and banks understand that. Yeah. So little by little, they're learning.
Your great work. And that's why I love you, and God bless that I've met you, and I want to support you, and I will, not want, I will. And we'll talk about real quick here because we're coming to the end. What does the future look like with financial scam? What do you see happen?
It's very difficult because you don't talk to the victims much. And that's the great thing about SCARS is that we're a victim support group. There's a lot of technology out there, and I've worked with a company called Verafin. It's part of a NASDAQ organization. There's technology to understand the transactional stuff. And I was like, you guys have to do a little bit better in following the money, following the transactions. Any bank that had seen my history of wire transfers, which was almost zero, maybe one prior to this, with buying a home, if they had seen me start doing wire transfers one after another, for 2 years, it would have been like a big red flag. Mel Robbins talked about red flags. Hello, stop this woman, somehow slow her down. And so I get frustrated with banking organizations, financial institutions, because I understand their bottom line is money. But if you're losing your clients because you're not protecting them from some of these things, then that's the problem. And how is that going to change here in the United States? I'm not sure. In Europe, Britain and England, the banks are going to become responsible for paying back the victims. Well, that'll slow them down and letting the victims do it. I mean, Dr. McGinnis and I have talked to financial organizations saying, maybe you need to have some sort of document that if you recognize that someone's being taken, have them read it, have them sign it, make them aware that maybe they are participating in a crime that they might be responsible for. cover your rear end, right? As a banker, if this person signs this, then the bank's not responsible. But they're like, oh, now we got too many lawyers involved. You get one of those guys whose mom has been taken, and they're going to change what they're doing.
Yeah. Yeah. The victim.
How change, I don't know. It's by speaking up, by talking about it, and not by shaming the victims, because that'll shut them down in a heartbeat.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's what you're doing. You're in Mel Robbins. She's been all over interviewing. I'm so proud that she came to my TV show. How can people support you? I'll put the websites back up. Any other way people can support you in this?
The best thing they can do, I mean, if you know somebody that's been taken, please have them reach out to me. It can go to Debby at The Woman Behind the Smile. I will respond to victims. I will get you involved with SCARS, the Society of Citizens Against Relationship Scams. We've just launched a 12, 13-week scam school. It's called Scam Survivors, and it's a step-by-step process to help you understand what had happened, help you, prepare to go to the law enforcement to get a report, help you to get involved in working with a therapist. It's really important to work with a trauma therapist, and we're partnered with Betterment Help or with BetterHelp.com and provide 30 days whatever of free therapy. We are trying our best to get the word out there. Tim does a lot of training with law enforcement in Ghana, with universities in Ghana. They're seeing that these young men that are being taken up as scammers are being used as criminals overseas. There is a mental breakdown in their psychology, as they don't want to have a problem when they get older. So they're training them in universities and psychology departments on this is what's going to happen if you're involved in this. It's kind of like looking at mugshots. That is very detrimental to your health. And so part of the anti-scam groups are putting all these mugshots out there. Well, that just is devastating to a victim. Why start looking at those pictures? They all start looking alike. But it's learning how this happened, learning how vulnerable we all can be, figuring out what has happened in our lives, back in the day, over time that might make you susceptible to this. But don't blame anybody, because it doesn't matter if you're a man, a woman, if you're rich or poor, if you're white, black, Asian, whatever you are a possible victim to this. And your mother, your father, your best friend, listen to what they're saying. Because if they're saying something about, well, I just met this really fabulous person online and I'm really excited, and I heard this the other day. A friend of mine called up and said, I don't know what to do. My birth mother is involved in something like this, and I don't know how to stop her. And I'm like, if you're not on any of her bank accounts, there's absolutely nothing you can do to stop her. And if I used to say, if you haven't seen the whites of their eyes in 2 weeks, it's a scam. But now they're scammers in person.
Yeah, that's another subject we could talk about down the road.
The so it's education. It's learning about prevention's not going to help. It's really it's helping yourself learn how to be safe online. And that's a whole other story. But we start with our young kids, because today we see sextortion taking the lives of teenagers as quickly as we're seeing relationship scams taking the lives of older citizens. It's everybody. And if we need to have some sort of safety programs for how do you successfully, get through online. When we put our kindergarten kids online, now we're making them think that they know what they're doing. So the scam victims today that are being hit the hardest, some of them are the millennials who've grown up online thinking they know everything. And they're being taken in pig butchering and investment fraud. And they are angry, angry victims because they thought they knew better. And now they become very revenge oriented. And that's not going to stop it.
And it's not going to solve anything. Well, time has flown. I can't believe I like to keep talking. I love hearing about this. Not for the subject, but what you're doing to solve this. Together we serve. Your servants' hearts come out. Audience, reach out to her. There's the websites. I've kept them up. Probably a way to donate as well, if need be. And get her book. What's the name of the book, real quick?
The Woman Behind the Smile. It's available on Amazon, and all the things are on the womanbehindthesmile.com. Also, my website.
Perfect. Reach out to that. God bless you, Debby. I'm here for you. Please reach out to her, audience. This has been great. We'll see you next week, Friday at 2 p.m. Pacific, 5 p.m. Eastern on Together We Serve TV show. Everybody have an incredible day. Me and Debby, thank you so much for watching.
Thanks.